Brazil is a major agricultural producer but relies heavily on imported fertilizers. About 85% of its supply comes from abroad. Today I'm joined by market intelligence analyst Tomas Pernias at StoneX to discuss the challenges that this dependence creates, how global events affect Brazil's fertilizer market, and what steps the country is taking to boost domestic production ahead of a crucial planting season. Thank you for joining me, Tomas.
It's my pleasure.
Brazil is the fourth largest consumer of fertilizer in the world, but only produces a very small proportion of its needs.
Exactly. Brazil is a major player when it comes to the agricultural production, but that comes with a cost because Brazil is also one of the largest consumers of fertilizer, which is why demand for fertilizer in Brazil has grown steadily at around 4% annually over the last decade. And since the country's cultivated area continues to expand, year after year, we expect fertilizer demand to keep increasing as well. However, Brazil is not a major producer in the global fertilizer market. Today, as you mentioned, Brazil, nearly 85% of the fertilizer consumed in Brazil is supplied by imports. And as a result, the Brazilian market heavily relies on imported materials from several countries. So, if there is a disruption in global fertilizer trade flow, Brazil could struggle to get enough supply.
And so I imagine that means that sometimes Brazil can find itself in some sticky situations.
Exactly. Brazil relies on the international market for its fertilizer supply, so any event that causes disruptions in this market has the potential to affect Brazilian supply in several ways. A good example is what we saw a few years ago. COVID-19 caused a major global supply chain crisis that increased international transportation costs. Another example is what we saw between Ukraine and Russia. This event sparked fear that Russia would cut off fertilizer export to Brazil, so buyers moved quickly to secure what they needed, driving fertilizer prices to skyrocket. And additionally, during times of crisis, the Brazilian currency, the real, tends to lose value. So this depreciation makes imported products much more expensive in the Brazilian domestic market. So in short, disruptive events in the global fertilizer market can have serious consequences for Brazil.
So is that why the Brazilian government decided to launch a national plan to increase domestic fertilizer production?
Yes, Brazil wants to reduce its reliance on fertilizer imports. So, a few years ago, it launched the 2022-2050 National Fertilizer Plan. It's a program that combines public and private investments aiming to expand fertilizer production in the country. Nowadays, nearly 15% of the fertilizers used in Brazil were domestically produced. So this plan aims to bring this proportion up to 2050, up to 50% in 2050. But I must emphasize that this is a long-term objective because such investments will take years to mature. So in short term, we expect Brazilian fertilizer demand will continue to grow and production may take years to increase substantially.
So who do you import your fertilizers from? I mean, since Brazil has a special relationship with China when it comes to exporting its soybeans, its beef, cotton, etc., does that mean that a lot of fertilizers come from there?
Yes, Brazil imports a significant amount of nitrogen and phosphate fertilizers from China, and it is fair to say that China is one of the main suppliers to the Brazilian market. However, other countries also play key roles in Brazil's fertilizer supply. For example, Brazilian potash imports come from Canada, nitrogen comes from the Middle East, sulfur comes from the United States, while phosphate is supplied by Morocco, Russia, China. So, in the end, Brazil must adopt a very pragmatic approach in the international market because to ensure a stable fertilizer supply, the country cannot afford to burn bridges with key trading partners. So, maintaining a strong and diplomatic relations in the international market is essential to minimize the risks of being a major consumer with relatively low domestic production.
And finally, Tomas, Brazil is coming to a crucial time in the agricultural season. Tell me about that.
Exactly. At the end of the year, we have the planting season here in the Southern Hemisphere, which means Brazilian buyers need to ensure they have enough fertilizer for their summer crops. And with Brazilian buyers becoming more active from July onward, this creates buying pressure that can drive fertilizer prices higher in the Southern Hemisphere. So, this is an interesting aspect of the Brazilian fertilizer market because although fertilizer prices generally follow global trends, significant regional differences can occur. So, in the US, fertilizer prices are usually firmer and rising in February, March, and April, as this period corresponds to the spring planting season in the Northern Hemisphere. However, in contrast, in Brazil, spring begins in September, which is a crucial time because by then farmers must secure their fertilizer supply for the planting season. So, this is when the bullish trend is more common in the southern hemisphere. In 2025, however, we are seeing a bullish trend in Brazil since the beginning of the year, with prices gradually strengthening over the past few months. So this raises an important question in Brazil. Will prices rise even further as the planting season approaches, or will prices remain steady throughout the end of the year? This is one question we're being hearing from our clients.
Thank you so much for your analysis, Tomas. It's been extremely insightful. For more videos like this, please do like and subscribe.